This is one of those Sundays where I'm actually glad to get away from there. Our guest minister last Sunday adjusted the height of the pulpit to lower. And so I feel like I've moved and things are out of sync. I'm going to have to raise it back up when I get a chance. I walked up to it and I said, wait a minute, it should be here, and it's about here. Which means that's all my papers are that much further away from me. So if you see me picking them up and doing this, you'll understand what is happening. We live rather frantic lives. That's not news to any of you. We're always rushing from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And in some ways, sometimes we take great pride in all the things that we can cram into a day. All the places that we can be, all the things that we can do, all the experiences we can have, and we'll schedule them so that there's just enough time to run from one to the other, or we'll complain about how little time we have between the two or the three or the four things we have to do and how we can't get to them, or we'll say, I have 5 meetings tonight. And we're rushing from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And we think that it's gotten worse. I'm not so sure, and I'll come back to why I'll tell you I'm not so sure in a moment. The pace may have changed, but the reality of it has probably always been there in the way we live. One commentator, and in recognizing this reality in our lives, describes it as a frantic momentum forward, with no space between experiences for us to reflect or to think about what those events and experiences mean, or what we might be weaving together in the meaning of our lives. That it almost becomes, and it's an interesting word, but in this frantic momentum forward, it almost becomes mindless. We experience it, we move on. We experience it, we move on. We experience it, we move on. But we don't think. We don't reflect. And he suggests that our reading for this morning encourages and offers us an opportunity to think about how God breaks into that frantic momentum forward to slow us down, to take the fragmented pieces of our lives and weave them into a meaningful whole, a purposeful whole. Now I'm going to come back to why I think it's always been that way, although the pace may have changed. I think it's always been that way because if you read the story of that we read this morning and think about what is happening, there is a sense in which I can insert, or maybe I'm just guilty of reading back from our own context. But here we have Cleopas and another disciple, we don't know exactly who, but another follower of Jesus, who they've experienced and witnessed the crucifixion. They have gone through a period of grief and celebrating, and all of that has been part of and intermixed with Passover. And the time that they had allotted to be in Jerusalem for the Passover's passed. And it's like, ding, 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 the bell has rung. Sorry, folks, there's a rumor about Jesus being raised from the dead, but we got to get home. We got to go. And off the road they go. Or down the road they go. Walking and talking as they go, kind of like what happens for me sometimes when I've been to a meeting that's been particularly intense, but I know I've got to go. And so as I drive home, I'm glad if I'm driving home or riding home with someone else, and we can kind of talk and debrief. What was that about? What happened there? How did you understand that? You never do that, do you? All the time, right? walking and talking as we go through life. And so I think the pace of moving on and moving on and moving on has always been there, and that we do need opportunities to talk about it as we go. They're talking about it, and suddenly among them comes Jesus, and Jesus is not recognized by them because, honestly, they're not expecting Jesus. Just like we go through life a lot not expecting God to be part of this. Let's keep it moving. Why should God care about all the things that I'm doing so quickly? We don't like to admit it, but we think like that sometimes. So they're not expecting to see Jesus. But Jesus comes among them. And the conversations begin. And they can recite all of the events. Here's what happened. Jesus asked them, what are you talking about? And they say, are you the only person who doesn't know? And they can recite all of the facts, one after the other. We'd been following Jesus of Nazareth. We thought he might be the Messiah. But he was crucified by our religious leaders. And 2 women went out to the tomb today. This morning. And when they got there, they were met by 2 angels who told them he's not there, he's risen. And other disciples went out there to check it out, and they found it just like they said, but no one has seen the risen Jesus. They can recite all of the facts. I can recite everything that I've done in my day. But the problem is, in reciting all of those facts, they have no clue what it means. They're trying to figure it out. Just like sometimes we can recite all of the facts of the things that we're doing in a day. But sometimes we got no clue where it's going, or what it means, or how God is even in it. And so Jesus begins to explain to them all of the Scriptures and all the things that are happening, and he opens up to them the revelation of God, the Word of God. And it's an 8-mile walk. So there's lots of explaining. And when they get to evening and to the place that maybe is home for them, we don't know for sure. But when they get to this place, they insist that he come to be with them, even though he had gone ahead of them, not forcing them to invite him, and they call him back and invite him. They invite him to stay with them. They invite him to share a meal with them. And when he takes the bread and blesses and breaks it, they recognize him in that moment. And God breaks in. And all of the things that have been happening start to come together, to have a meaning. We live our lives with this frantic momentum forward. We need to open ourselves by the reading of the Scriptures and the reflecting on those Scriptures by breaking bread and allowing God's eternal presence to break into the frantic momentum forward. Make some sense out of the pieces of our lives. So for that reason, I encourage a couple of practices. today. One of them is obvious. I think that Sunday morning is a critical time for breaking open the frantic momentum forward, if we'll give ourselves the time to do that and not have it happen in a way that feels so frantic or that unfolds so frantically, but to take time to sit in classroom settings, in worship settings, to stop. Just stop the frantic momentum forward and just be. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge because in your pockets you have cell phones on vibrate with text messages and tweets that are coming in. Some of you, not all of you. And you're thinking about the fact that, oh, he's getting a little long on the sermon, and our reservation for that Mother's Day brunch is, right? We live our lives thinking about the next thing. And Sunday morning is an opportunity to just stop and to say, where has God been in all this? And what is God weaving out of the pieces of my life? Another, and gosh, this is hard for us, but when I think about the alternative title of today, the Festival of the Christian Home, Mother's Day, I think about those meals that we share on a regular basis in our homes. And the fact that those meals, and maybe you don't share them enough, and maybe that's the thing you want to recover, is a meal once a day where you sit down as a family and talk about what's unfolding in your life. To tell the stories, because as we tell the stories of what happened today as a family, we begin to weave together some of the pieces of what's been happening. And the Spirit of God and the Spirit of Christ, just as the Spirit of Christ is present at this table, the Spirit of Christ is present at that table and can weave together some meaning for you as a family. But in the frantic momentum forward, we've stopped doing that. I would be brave enough to say that I bet a majority of us don't have a meal together as a family every day. I'd love to be wrong. But I think based on what I read, it's a safe bet. So recovering some kind of meal sometime during the day, if it's not every day, maybe most days, and if it's not every single person in the family, maybe as many as possible. And a conversation, not a race through the meal. And I will confess, I am guilty of eating way too fast. Not dawdling enough over my food and the conversation. And enjoying the gift that God is giving me in that moment. The practice of allowing the eternal to break in, or slowing down this frantic pace, made me think about a piece that Paul Galbraith wrote about the practice of baptism in Sierra Leone. One custom. And I don't know that I fully understand exactly how this is or have it exactly right, but here's how Paul describes it. In Sierra Leone, and I'm going to walk back to the font for this, so I'm going to make the people in the video booth nuts. And maybe some of you. Paul Galbraith